Well, welcome everyone to the Music City Multicon 2021. I would like to introduce a gentleman who's been a comic artist for Marvel, DC, and Valiant and Acclaim, as well as for other publishers. He may be best known for his work on Turok, Dinosaur Hunter, Hawkman, Black Condor, Identity Crisis, as well as a relaunch of Action Comics with DC in the New 52. He's been an instructor at the Kubert School, and in 2018, he was named a special ambassador for the Inkwell Awards to help further the group's mission of public promotion, education, and recognition of the art form of inking and ink artists in the United States. Ladies and gentlemen, please welcome Rags Morales.
I like the acoustic.
You like that intro?
I like
was
that.
that good?
That was nice. That was good.
And just so you all know who I am, I started reading comic books in 1976. I started with Archie, Richie Rich, and Casper. I moved up to X-Men shortly thereafter. In college, I worked at a comic shop in Los Angeles. I currently have about 25,000 comic books. I lost count several decades ago. My daughter is named after Wonder Woman. So that's how dedicated we are to comic books. And as a high school English teacher, I have incorporated comics and popular culture into my curriculum. So my name is David Holden. I'm currently a Nashville resident. I'm very thankful to be here, and let's get started.
All right.
All right.
Let's do this.
So, Rags, may I call you Rags?
Yes, you may.
Okay.
I prefer.
All right. I know a lot about you in terms of your the work that you've done, in comic books since you became a professional. But I'd like to go back a little bit. Can you tell us a little bit about your educational background as it relates to the industry? Did you major in an art-related field? And was the comic book industry something you were actively trying to find work in?
That kind of yes and no.
Uh-huh.
When I was a kid, comic books was my refuge. I moved into New Jersey when I was 4 years old from Manhattan, and I was the only person of a specific spice in my neighborhood. Mm-hmm. So I found refuge in comics, and back then comics were 20 cents. No, not even. It might have been still a dime then.
Yeah,
we're talking 1970.
Mm-hmm.
But, my father also got me involved in Boy Scouts and Little League and things like that. And even though I enjoyed superhero fantasy, when you would have Saturday mornings cartoons, right? That was before something called Cartoon Network. We used to only wait 1 day a week. And every Saturday we would have our bowl of Captain Crunch, so soggy that it didn't cut the roof of your mouth. And we would just veg out and, we'd get comic books, and every September they'd have the double page spread in the middle would be the new lineup for ABC, CBS, NBC, and all the cartoons they were putting out. So that was my passion for that particular art form. And then, of course, there was things like Planet of the Apes, the TV serial that was out. Johnny Wise, Mother Tarzan, Prince Valiant, all the stuff that any kid would like. A Lone Ranger and Tonto, to which Tonto was really the only one that interested me. Surprise, surprise. But as I got older, and because I was in Boy Scouts, we used to get Boys Life magazine, and Norman Rockwell was the artist on a lot of the Boys Life covers. And long before AT&T, there was Ma Bell, and Ma Bell would get the new telephone books, and they would have occasionally a Norman Rockwell painting on that. So I started falling in love with illustration. So it was kind of like somewhere between the two is what really interested me. And this is not for young ears. I'm looking at two of them. David Giffen has a wonderful saying. We lose our audience when they lose their virginity. And as I became, I had someone actually introduce me to Charles Dana Gibson, and I was into the pen and ink illustrators of the turn of the century, of the early 1900s. Charles Dana Gibson, James Montgomery Flagg, Joseph Clement Cole, just anybody really. You know, if you had three names, essentially, you had to have three names. You had three names, you had my attention. And for the longest time, I thought that's what I was going to do. But as I grew older and I started looking at my prospects as a profession, not a lot of work for illustrators. You know, photography had taken over, and there was something new called computers that was going to change things. And I just missed computer courses by 1 year. I graduated in 1985, and the first class to have computer courses was 1986. So I missed it by a year. And so I said, okay, well, I still like comic books. And luckily for me, the Joe Kubert School that I eventually ended up teaching for 2.5 years was 15 minutes from where I lived. So I didn't even have to have a dorm room. I could always just drive in. And that's where my focus was. And eventually I became a comic book artist. Along the way, my first job out of art school was a paper route. Because back in 1988, there was no cell phones. There was no computers. There was only the want ads. So it was great because I had a car. I was still living at my home with my mother. And I had a car, and I had to be able to afford that car. So a paper route paid for my insurance, it paid for gas, and it gave me a daily dose of the want ads. And it gave me all day long to work on my portfolio while I did, the early morning paper route. So I was basically done by 9 o'clock in the morning. The rest of the day I would work on my portfolio. And my first job in art was a silkscreen artist in Linden, New Jersey. And in this particular company was called Speed Limit, and they did joggers and T-shirts. And because I knew how to run a stack camera, because back when I was in high school, my first real, and I was always doing art courses. All my electives were art, where draftsmanship was one, architectural illustration was another. I even took interior design, but I didn't like the teacher, so I quit that one. And of course, it was Art 1 and Art 2, and all my teachers throughout my entire youth, all of them were pushing my parents, pushing them to art. He's going to be an artist. He understands the language, essentially. Kind of, if you ever seen Rocket Man?
Yeah.
Okay, the scene where a young Elton John is playing Rachmaninoff, and she plays it first, and then he does it note for note up until where she stops. And she says, "Why'd you stop?" I says, "Well, that's where you stopped." Okay? It was like that for me. And not to give me any kind of lofty, impression, but it was essentially what he was saying is what I'm saying, is that when you see it or you hear it, it's a language that you instantaneously understand. It doesn't have to be explained to you. You get what they're trying to do, and that's what it was like for me. So I guess you could say I was gifted. Although the Kubert School likes to say art is where talent is made, and it's true. People ask me, does my child have talent? And they'll show me their artwork, and I say, I don't want to see it. I got two questions. Do they wake up with it? Do they go to bed with it? If they do that, everything else is a skill set. It just takes time to get there. Because passion is the only thing you can't teach. So I was working at this Speed Limit, and I knew, having been to in a vocational course in my junior year in high school for commercial art, what copyright infringement was. And I knew that when they handed me, my first job was a Roger Rabbit, a T-shirt for Who Framed Roger Rabbit. And I knew how to do 4-color, 8-color separation. I could work with StatCam. I knew how to work with Rubylith and Amberlith, and how to do all that, and registration and everything I needed to do for it to work. But I also knew I wasn't putting anything down that said copyright.
Right.
Yeah. So I was like, okay. Well, Roger Rabbit eventually turned into a Spree, and Banana Republic, and Nike, and Mets and Yankees, and Christmas time they'd hand me a catalog and they'll say do something like that. And I says, well, I'm not getting in trouble, so I did a reasonable facsimile.
Right.
Okay. And we'd sell that. I even did "Don't Worry, Be Happy" because the Bobby McFerrin song was out at the time. It was a big hit, so I did this cute little bee going like this. We made T-shirts of that. So one day I'm in my office, and Mel was the owner. And Mel was a yeller, always yell. He's usually yelling at his wife, Enid, and he'd always hear Mel yell, "Handle it, Enid." So that was common. That was like every day. And so I'm working one day, and I hear Mel yelling, but he's not yelling at Enid. Now he's screaming at the top of his lungs. I'm like, oh, someone's really in trouble. I'm glad it's not me. I'm working. But he's like, it's really passionate. So I was like, well, let me find out what's happening. Now I worked at the end of a hall, and the next door was his office. And then you got to the end of the hall, and then it would kind of, come into a T, and then to the right's the entrance, and to the left is where they did the production. Sales department's in front. My art director, who was my roommate, she had her office next to the sales department. So I open up the door, and I look at Mel's door, and there's a huge crowd of people. And in the middle of this crowd is a large camera, So what the hell is this? But there's a camera, so I close the door, I check my coif, open up the door, and I sashay past it. And as I'm going past this crowd, I get out to where it opens up at the T. I look to the entrance, and there are cops there. And there are undercover cops there. And there's paper flying everywhere. So I'm like, whoa, I go left. Past the stack camera, go to the back of the production. My buddy Sean's working there. And I said, Sean, what's going on? He says, oh, you remember, I can't remember the guy's name. You remember so-and-so? Yeah, what happened to him? He says, oh, he blew the whistle on Mel. I was like, oh, this might be my last day of work, so I got to go back. So I head back to my office, and on my way, I get a tap on the shoulder, and I turn around, and it's like, I guess when you're scared, things look bigger. It looked like the biggest undercover cop. Elliot Ness was there, and he's tapping me on the shoulder. Elliot Ness, the Untouchables kids. It was a TV show about the FBI. And Elliot Ness is tapping my shoulder. So he says, do you work here? I go, yeah. He goes, what do you do? I says, the house artist. I work in the art department. He says, do you know where the files are, where the acetate overlays are? I go, yeah. He goes, show them to me. Okay. So I went into and at the time, my art director roommate, she was getting her teeth done, so she wasn't in that day. I walked into a room, and they had on the floor these flat files, very good slats, just, vertical files. And I kneeled down to start pulling out, and I start pulling out Benetton, Esprit, Nike, Banana Republic, and Mets and Yankees. And as I'm doing this, the blast of light to my left. And I turn, and there's Channel 2 news camera right on me. You ever had that nervous laughter? You're like, so I'm pulling all this stuff out. I was like, oh boy, this is the last day I'm going to be here. I hand him the stuff. He says, thank you. I says, thank you. I went back and opened it. I was a smoker back then. I opened up the back door because I had a back door to my office. I was out there puffing away. I was like, oh my God, I'm going to be on Channel 2 News at the end of my career. And so I ended up quitting that day. And so from that job, I went to do sandwiches at a Subway sandwich. Subway was when it was new. It was like, late 80s. It was a new thing. And there was one, and I was living in Elizabeth, New Jersey, so it was one like a bus ride away. So I was like, okay, I think I'm going to do that for now until I figure it out. Because I've been here before. I've had, menial jobs when I was working on my portfolio. I figured I'd still do it. And I was doing that, and it was a pretty crazy neighborhood, and I was closing, and it was like people coming in with, it was like 5 guys and 1 girl, because, you get a sandwich, you get another one half price, and drinks are free, so they were all trying to get with her, and I was just like, it was like one of those things. And so it got to the point that my roommate, because we all quit. She would quit too.
Okay.
And so did Sean, by the way. So the three of us were going to be like the three amigos, go ahead and do our own prints and T-shirts and things like that with no real equipment. And so, and they were dating at the time. So it eventually disappeared. And then one day I wake up and she's gone, leaving me with the lease. So I was like, okay, well, I guess I could stretch it out for this long. And the only thing I was eating was Subway sandwiches, and rent was coming up, and I was down to my last bit of food.
Oh, wow.
So I gave Mike Chen, who's an administrator at the Joe Cuba School, who used to be my teacher and then was an administrator, still is. I says, Mike, I'm in a bad spot. Can you give me some phone numbers for some editors? He said, sure. He gave me a whole list of editors. I said, terrific. I gathered up on my portfolio, and I started calling these editors. And as soon as I got one to commit to a specific date, I called the next one saying, I'm going to be here at such and such a day. Can you see me? So I had 5 interviews that day with 5 different editors. And I had an A portfolio and a B portfolio in the back. So if I kept hearing comments of one particular piece, I would pull that out and pull out the best of the B side. And put that out, see how that worked out. None of them offered me any work. But the last one, and it's funny, one of them was Mike Carlin, who ended up being the editor on Identity Crisis.
Right.
Yeah. And so he told me, he says, you're about a year away. I said, well, I don't have a year. I got one can of...
Right, rent's due like in a week.
So, and then the last editor, she was on her way out to Wisconsin to do, because she was working with the TSR.
Okay.
And they were in Wisconsin, they were in Milwaukee. And so she was not going to come back for like 2 weeks. So I was like, well, what am I going to do now? So I called my father, and between my father and my uncle, they came up with rent for 1 month. Great. And I called my mom, and she and my sister came up with groceries. So good. Covered for a month. Continued to work on my portfolio. And I waited out. It's just good, because I was just like, and I don't know if there's a God, but I prayed. Down to my last can, jar of marinara sauce and spaghetti, and that was it. That was my last meal before my family helped me out. And then sure enough, she came back in 2 weeks. I showed her my stuff. She says, terrific. I have a book we could use an artist for. Here's some character sheets. Can you come up with these characters? I said, sure. When do you need them? She goes, whenever. That's a trap.
Right.
I had all 5 characters the next day. And she liked them. She liked what she saw. And she gave me a shot. And she gave me an issue. Got the script. Boom. 8 pages a week. The standard for the industry, by the way, is 5. So I was almost doubling it. 8 pages a week. And she liked it. And she gave me a little critique. I said, sure. I fixed it. No problem. So I was coachable. Important. I was on time, very important. And more important than that, I understood her job. And her job was to make sure it got out on time and it looked good. So I worked for like the first 4 issues, and then I kept asking, is it possible to get a contract? And they gave me a continuity contract for, I think, for 12 issues, which was great, because then I slowed down to 5 pages a week, which is the industry standard, but it gave me time to actually work on my work. Become better at it. So the first few issues they're okay. There's some bright moments, some flashes, but for the most part, there's a lot of crappy backgrounds. Just trying to get the job done. And that's how I actually ended up in the industry. And then, they gave me continuity. And then that contract, they gave me another one after that. And I did 19 issues of Forgotten Realms, and that's why I broke in.
Right on. Forgotten Realms. I don't know if any of you are gamers, but I remember buying Forgotten Realms and just falling in love with the fantasy story, and I just got interested in gaming. I didn't go all the way, but I do remember your early art. I believe me, I remember your early art, and Forgotten Realms, just that fantasy stuff just really appealed to me, and I loved your style. You also said something earlier too that I think was really important. A lot of people don't get it. A lot of people just think that, success just happens. But You're working these menial jobs. You're trying to string together rent. Sometimes you're down to your last dollar, but you got to persist. And the thing that you said that really stuck with me is that, you can't teach passion. You got to have it.
Right.
If you wake up with the portfolio in your hand and you go to bed with the portfolio in your hand, I could teach you the other skills, but I can't teach you passion.
I've had dreams of techniques that woke me up in the middle of the night, and I got out a piece of paper and see if I could capture it.
Yeah.
Yeah, I've had that. No, there's a difference between Michael Jordan or LeBron James.
Yeah.
Whatever.
Right.
And the last guy on the bench is the 700 shots a day he took every single day.
Yeah. Because
he just loved the feel of making the shots.
Yeah. That's really difficult for a lot of people, but
that's what Kobe did.
Yeah.
Kobe was the same way.
Yep. Kobe would get up before everybody and be done with workouts by like 5 a.m. Rags, let me ask you a couple of other questions. You had mentioned that, early on you would read Boy's Life, you would see Norman Rockwell art, and you were just kind of really paying attention to all of the creativity in your environment, wherever that was.
Right.
Once you became a pro, once you got into the industry, were there any other artistic influences that you kind of just drew inspiration? Can you talk a little bit more about where you got your inspiration from some other professional artists?
If you were doing work, you had my attention. I would go through. There was something called The Children of God. Okay, thank God. I can let it rip. Right? I can dummy it down, right? All right. There was in the TV Guide, right? And you go through the TV. They had a thing called TV Guide.
Yeah. When we used to change channels, right?
Yeah. Get up, right, and turn the knob
before VCRs.
And I was always big on PBS because PBS would always do something more interesting than your typical thing. And Charles Schultz one time was drawing his Peanuts characters, and I made a note. I was not going to do anything else but show up in front of my TV and watch Charles Schultz draw. I had no clue where I was going artistically. I just knew that I needed to feed an artistic beast. It was just this thing that just needed more information. I was always going to, when I was in school, always going to the library and always bringing back how to, draw by Jack Ham late. Paying 50 cents because I was late with the book. Anything in a bookstore that had anything to do with drawing, I would have to comb the bottom of my parents. Can you buy me that? My parents were always very supportive. That's very important. Because they were union people. So anything that seemed more interesting, even though I wasn't going to be a doctor or a lawyer or even a priest. I actually thought I was going to be a priest after I saw Exorcist. It scared the hell out of me. No, that spinning head and the pea soup, forget about it. That was enough for me. I was, oh God, they're going to get me. So yeah, anything at all that just, so and Saturday and Sundays, were great because you get this big star ledger with a meaty, cartoons and comics.
That was the New Jersey newspaper. I'm from
northern
Jersey too.
New Jersey, right? That was the big paper in northern New Jersey. So I would always, be the first one to get the comics and pull them out before anybody else. And so I was always into that, and again, comic books, and again, anything on Boy's Life or anything. But the names didn't become names to me until I was older. Right. I knew Norman Rockwell, but I didn't know who Dean Cornwell was. I didn't know who John Singer Sargent was. But I did know who Neil Adams was. And he was drawn realistically because I was always interested in illustration because he was drawing realistically. That caught my attention. So I would judge comic book artists based on that criteria. And then it wasn't too long before I started seeing a bit of it nudge in a bit of a more, I guess, abstract way. So where it started off with Neil Adams, it eventually turned into John Buscema, and then Garcia Lopez, and then not long after that, by the time I hit junior high, Michael Golden caught my eye, and then Frazetta, of course, always Frazetta. Yeah. But the thing about the common thread, and I always said that if you were to really analyze me, if Norman Rockwell, Frank Frazetta, and Neil Adams had an orgy, I would be the product of that orgy. See, I saw you falling asleep. I figured that would help you. But true, yeah. I've always said that. I would be the product of that gangbang, and because the one common thread between all of them is that they had a sense of caricature, and there was a time I thought it'd be Mort Drucker too, Mad Magazine. A sense of caricature, but realism at the same time. And that interested me.
Yeah.
And it wasn't long before light source was the important thing. Light source was the definitive reason why it became realistic, a consistent light source. And even in a cartoon, and if you ever, back in the 70s, airbrush became a thing.
Right.
And before you knew it, they had a Donald Duck with an airbrush. And that's when I started seeing depth. And that's where it became realistic to me. So I was like, well, there's something to this thing about rendering, about shadows, about light source, about consistency. Even in a cartoonish figure, it looks realistic.
Right.
If you do it right.
Yeah. As you were talking, you made me, I had never heard the names Charles Schulz and Neil Adams in the same sentence. But that just kind of highlights how there's something to learn from everybody.
Sure.
And as you were saying each name, I was thinking of your art, and I can see those influences while you still retain your own style. I can see some of like the shadow work that Neil Adams would do to kind of bring some gravitas to the work. I see that in yours. I see some of the musculature that Michael Golden, would how he would just portray some muscles. I can see that a little bit, but again, it's still your style. But I could see some of those influences in your work.
And that's how style is born.
Yeah.
There's a lot of people that, especially students, that come up to me with stylized stuff. And it's nice in style, but there's no foundation there. It's like building a house with no framework. It's just siding.
Right.
And I always told when I was teaching, I says, I don't want to ever see any of you show up to me style, because I'll tell you right now, you stink at it. You stink on ice. And the reason why you stink at it, because you haven't learned how to build style. Style is an evolution process. All forms of art eventually become abstract, and that's the final level. And that's the whole point of being an artist, is to get to the point where 10 strokes becomes 2 or 3 or 1. And once you can master that, then you've hit the final level. That's the point of it. So if you're coming at me with a style with no substance underneath it, it rings hollow. It looks like an attempt at something else that you are not. You want to be that. Oh, you dream of being that. Oh, you wear the clothes of that. You're faking it until you're making it, but you're not going to do it until you study it. And when you learn the basic fundamentals, that eventually, over time, over year, and it's nothing that you do with an intent. It's just something that slowly evolves. And if you're okay with your own work, then you're okay with the style that eventually becomes of it. And if you love it, it'll show, and then other people will love it too.
Right on. I want to shift the conversation a little bit and also give any of the audience members an opportunity to maybe ask a couple of questions that they have for you. I want to talk a little bit about, I read a lot about different creators and different creative teams and everything like that. And could you just maybe describe what's one of your favorite collaborations or collaborative experiences that you've had? Who's great to work with? Who would you love to work with? Or what was an experience that you had that was just like, man, that was awesome. We created something greater than either of us could have done individually.
Well, I can always go with anything that's like monetarily successful. As primarily a penciler, and the reason why I became a penciler is because I wanted to have more control of the artwork. I didn't want to be a follower. I wanted to be a leader. And it took not long for me to discover that there's a stigma with being an inker, that you're a line follower. And that is kind of sort of true, but let me qualify that, okay? over the years, back in the early days, back in the late 30s, 40s, you would have to have inking done because you wanted it to be a permanency that's going to be put on newsprint. You couldn't do that with pencil because it would fade and the technology wasn't quite there. So you would hand it off to an inker, and because you were all working in what would be considered a sweatshop of comic books, the penciler didn't have enough time for a lot of refinement. So in order for him to actually have a good piece rendered, he would have to have an equally good artist who can handle ink well. And between the two of them, they became one artist. And that's how it went. So for the longest time, you were not an inker, you were an embellisher. And you were taking the basic bone structure, okay, and as we're talking about style, the basic bone structure would be the pencils, and then the style would be layered on top of that because the sound structure is underneath. If it's sound, it's not going to be bad. And the other guy would come in with his little nuance to it, and he'll add something to it, and between the two of them became wonderful. And it took a long time for artists to get any recognition. It had to have a guy doing his own thing like a Will Eisner before names became important. And by then, okay, well, then it starts talking about who's in the sweatshop. Well, this guy's doing the pencils, this guy's doing the inks, this guy's doing lettering and all that. So that's how it started. But as comics became more popular and generations of comic book readers became comic book artists, they started adding the embellishment that was really due to the inker. And they became more tight with their work. And because they became more tight, pencilers took a little more time than they ever did before. So the guy who would come into ink would have to follow what was there. Okay, and he would have less time because the pencilers take a little more time. But he had to, but you know, and that's how it eventually evolved. So it's kind of like baseball. If you're a pitcher and you have 5 good pitches or 4 good pitches, you're a starter. That's your penciler. But if you're an inker, you have 2 or maybe 3 good pitches and you're in the bullpen and you're coming off. So things became specialized. And as names became more popular and people became more famous, more artists growing up would come in and dig in and dig in and dig in and really start doing beautiful work in pencil that sometimes didn't always translate in inks because inkers are too busy trying to translate every line in inks. It doesn't work that way. It's a very different medium. So for me, artistically, is when I worked with Gonzalo Mayo. Now, Gonzalo Mayo is a South American artist. I once made the mistake of thinking he was Filipino. And the Filipino artists, oh my God. He's not here to defend himself, so forgive me. This may not even be a true story, but I heard that Bernie Wrightson actually had Nestor Redondo fired from Swamp Thing because Wrightson created Swamp Thing, but Nestor Redondo was so good, it started overshadowing anything that Bernie Wrightson was doing. I don't know if that's true or not, but that's the story I heard. Egos.
Yeah.
Digging in, right? A Rosetta wannabe, right? So if Rosetta did, I got to be that. That's what Bernie Wrightson was. And so, and the Filipino, Nestor Redondo, Jerry Talawak, you've got Frank Reyes, you've got Alex Nino, my favorite, Alex Nino, Rudy Nebres, I'm sorry. Nestor Redondo had a brother, I forgot his brother, another Redondo, but fabulous. It's really good. Oh my God, it's so good. Tony DiZuniga is another one. These wonderful artists. And so when I got Gonzalo Mayo, I'm figuring, this guy knows his stuff. And my editor warned me, he's going to, we call it going gonzo. Gonzalo is going to go gonzo on your work. And I said, yes, he is. I didn't tighten it up. I gave it the 1940s approach, basic bone structure of what's there. And he loved it. He said, I could actually work on this now. I don't have to follow. I did one panel of a dinosaur head. It was a Turok. And I did one dinosaur head just to see what would happen. I tightened it up. It looked like shit. It looked terrible. And It really didn't. It was very uninspired to me. So the other stuff he was doing, it was just him on top. It was me with different clothing. That's all it was. And that was artistically probably my most favorite thing. And I'll never forget that. With the writer, I could say so many things about so many writers because I've worked with some of the best. Mm-hmm. And all of them have something different that made them them and me with them a unit. And I don't want to say Identity Crisis because it was so successful, to which it was. It really broke me. After 15 years of sweating away, I finally made it. Mm-hmm. But what it was about Identity Crisis was something that hadn't occurred to me. And wondering why, for so many years, I couldn't do really good action poses. Was because I was an illustrator at heart. And he was writing something that was sentimental. He was writing something that had nuance, subtlety. He was writing things that talked about people's emotions, and body language became important. And because of Identity Crisis, I was actually to give myself an identity crisis moment and say, I could put that away, and now I know who I am. Right on. You know, mm-hmm. I'm an actor. I'm an actor on paper. I'm a storyteller that does stage setting. I work on things like Light Source. And I work on things that are nuanced, you know? And I've always enjoyed looking at comic books and looking at two people talking and say, that sucks, and drawing it myself and doing it much better in my head, you know? But I never really cared about drawing a guy being punched through a wall. Mm-hmm. That didn't appeal to me. So to me, it was all about the human connection. And that's what I always tell my students is what is art, right? And I thought about it for many years because, you know, it's so subjective. But then it dawned on me that it's the creation of something from nothing. And it's in every favorite song. It's in every favorite movie. It's in every favorite book. The creation of something from nothing that speaks to or about the human condition. That's why your favorite song is your song. It gets you up. It gets you motivated, right? Mm-hmm. Your favorite book, your favorite movie does the same thing, right? So it's really about the human condition, because if the world was run by ducks, everything would be about a duck. Right? So that book, Identity Crisis, between the hugs between Tim Drake and his father, and the subtle way that everyone who was in on the whole mystery kind of looked at each other, and the body language spoke of it and all that, that was probably the most interesting thing as far as writers go. And it's funny because years before, when the comic book industry imploded, and I was unemployed for a year and a half and had a mortgage at the time, I was scratching for work, and I called up some of my old pals from TSR. I talked to Jeff Johns. And he wrote a story of the Old Forgotten Realms crew. But he changed the approach. He was trying to feed something else that he had never got a chance to do. And it wasn't as good as the comic book. And it was said so, that there's something missing in it. And then somebody said, draw it like Rags would or write it like Rags would draw it. Mm-hmm. And he did, and sure enough, it came back to life. So certainly the collaboration between an artist and a writer is very important.
Yeah, awesome. Let's just really quickly, what's on your plate now? Like what's projects you have going on?
Right now, I'm over there in the other room. Which way is it?
It's that direction.
Over there. That's my project. Now, 32 years, mm-hmm. 33 years in February. Over time, I became more and more expensive. Yeah. I'm sure you're going to get pay raises as you go along. Mm-hmm. And as soon as Time Warner decided to take over with Diane Nelson, as the publisher, I realized exactly what happens when a corporation takes over. The reason why they're rich, the reason why rich people stay rich is they don't spend money. Mm-hmm. You know? And I was too long in the tooth, too familiar with the company, and too expensive. So I get a call expecting to hear an extension because I was up in September of my exclusive deal, which is usually a yearly occurrence. And I got a call from Bob Harris at the time, and he gave me the bad news that they were not going to renew me. That unfortunately they had to cut my page rate, but they'd love to work with me. And I was like, all right, thanks, Bob. I'm going to give Marvel a call because I knew exactly what that was.
Right.
That was the attaboy, get out. And Marvel was paying even less, but it was a chance to work with Marvel, and I did a couple of things, nothing significant. But that's how it went, and then I got a smattering here and there, and of course I'm older. So certain things I can't do anymore, like put on a 24-hour day.
Right.
My record of working straight through is 36 hours. Wow. And I slept for 10.
Right.
That's when I was doing Impact Comics. Okay. Calathar.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
The ruins at the end of the book, he's yelling at the sky. That was me, 36 hours going, So yeah, that's where I am. I'm semi-retired in that I told them, I says, listen, I can't do monthly continuity anymore. 14-hour days for 7 days a week. Staying home while other people had holidays is no longer my idea anymore. My eyes dry. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. I'm much more efficient, but I just, So I'm good for miniseries. I'm good for maxi series. If there's a finite thing, I don't have to worry about, deadlines as much. Right. If they're willing to give me something like that or covers or that, I've made myself available for that. But as it turns out, especially when AT&T eventually bought the publishing rights, Time Warner always wanted it for the movies, but they sold the publishing rights to AT&T, and AT&T is not looking for a seller or a buyer because the publishing is not making as much money as It's making money, not losing money. It's just not making buku bucks that they're used to from the movies. So that's what's happening now. So that's why a lot of your older artists don't work. It's a variable, and it's a lot of things. Yeah. But for most part, it's just as these things become more popular, more valuable, or more attractive to larger entities. That's the reason why. So, but I do have a trilogy that Jim Starlin wants to do with me. Oh. And we were going to do it for Ominous Press until Ominous, fell apart. So now we're looking for a publisher. I don't know if it's going to get off the ground, but I did do 8 pages. I think it was 8 pages. Might have been 9 pages for a Kickstarter. Okay. And it was colored. I know it was colored because I hired the colorist because I had to hire the colorist. It turned out to be my girlfriend. Former student, very good artist. Smart too, former field biologist. But she's my partner in this. But if we can find a publisher, that'd be great. I don't know. So tried calling them. I don't know what's happening. So it's on Kickstarter now. It's not yet on Kickstarter because we don't have a publisher yet to back it up. Okay. So we should. They want to give me my page rate. Okay. That's the funny thing about it. So we'll look for that. So that's hopefully a future collaboration with Jim Starlin. Yes. Beautiful. Yes. Right on. Yes. Do you mind a couple of questions if anyone has any? Anybody have any questions? Yeah. So yes.
So what I was asking is, you come from a time where people were doing things for the first time, right? Mm-hmm. For doing things different and surprising each other and getting inspiration and feeding off of that. Now with the internet, with the saturation of so many ideas and it's more accessible. You don't have to have as much infrastructure behind it. Do you feel like that there is still those revolutionary moments and milestones in today's work, or do you feel like that's kind of gone?
Well, you're asking if there's a there, and I don't see it yet. Although there are smatterings of it. Netflix had a had a show called The End of the Fucking World. It started out as a comic book for an independent artist. And that's wonderful if the goal is to make a lot of money, you know. I don't think many artists care as much. They certainly want to make enough money to live and continue to do their work. But I think if an artist is really more concerned about that, they've already cut themselves off.
Yeah.
You know, they've cut themselves off at the knees. I think it's an exciting time for comics. And I think what's happening now is when you have people like a Jim Starlin or myself who don't really work for publishers anymore, doing our own thing. And then Jim's been doing, you know, his own stuff for a while now, you know. You're going to see more and more and more as it becomes, again, the infrastructure is a very good term. Not a lot of brick and mortar to worry about. You can do things digitally now. I think it's coming. And I think once it comes, the big companies are going to finally understand that maybe they should give their talent more room to breathe instead of trying to milk the same udder. Because that's a drag too. Because when you talk about money, you have the same idea. You know, when I did Identity Crisis, it was the death the murder of a beloved wife, which turned into the death of Maxwell Lord and the death of this and the death of that and everything that was the death cells. And that kind of happened in the 90s, you know, when everything was more utilitarian with your comic book characters. Everybody had a trench coat, you know, and they all had guns and they were all gritty and, you know. Trends happen, trends come and go. And they're usually done for the big companies to just stick their little tap in there and just pull away. So it's going to happen. It will happen. And when that happens, the big companies will steal that too. But, you know, if you can get away with it, I say absolutely be an independent artist because there is a bigger market because, again, it is easier to get your stuff out. At the same time, it's also easier to be overlooked because there is, as you say, oversaturation. But again, as I said before, it's about passion. And if you believe in it, it'll show. And if it shows, someone will see that.
Cool. I appreciate it. Thank you.
Thank you for your question. I think we might have time for one more question if anyone does have one. Does anyone have another question for Rags Morales? No?
Thank you for coming.
Oh, you do have one? Would you mind coming up here to the...
Have a seat.
In today's world, in your opinion, with the growing demand for digital artists, do you think that in the near future, the demand for traditional artists would be even less than what it is today?
No. Like we were talking about the airbrush. It's different from a regular brush. Still takes an artist. The tools will always change. And they'll always change to be more proficient, especially when money's involved. Colorists are the unfortunate product of the last man on a totem pole, or woman. And because a writer will take more time and rewrites happen, because a penciler is digging in because he's got to have an inker that's going to just ink the line that he puts down. And the inker, because of that, is going to take more time. By the time it gets to the colorist, and they get less money, they have to oftentimes get a book done in 2 days. A lot of sleepless nights for these people. Lately, they've been getting more recognition as colorists, and they're actually getting on the cover as part of the team, and they're also getting royalties, which is certainly a help to them at the expense of the writer and the inker and a penciler, but they're going to get a cut as well, and I'm fine with that. But the tools will change, and luckily because of digital, they get their job done faster because they are getting paid less per page, so they need to take on more projects. So certainly that helps them. And it's wonderful. I mean, I did a job for Bloodshot where there's a guy who kicks in the diner door and he just shoots people up because he's insane. That's what he does. He's a maniac. And in that scene, you ever see The Runaway by Norman Rockwell?
Yeah.
It's a cop and a kid's got his little stick and a little bag and his little polka dot thing, and he's a runaway, and there's a guy leaning in from the counter. He's got a cigarette dangling out of his mouth. They're having pop, right? You seen that? Well, I figured I'm going to do that scene, but now the kid's older, and he's seeing the cop again, and it's the same guy, behind the counter, except now they're being shot up. The colorist, who is Andrew Dollhouse, didn't realize that what that scene was. I said, oh, by the way, that guy has a yellow shirt. It's the kid from the Norman Rockwell painting. And he did it in a minute. That's a blessing. So digital stuff is a good thing. But what will separate a digital artist from another digital artist is the artist. It's like it has always been. Yeah. The only thing that really takes anything out in terms of, identity really is lettering. And the letterers are just, whatever program they have for that. Some of them, I think, actually do their own digital sound effects, which will separate them. But in the end, you're going to have a generation being brought up on it. So who am I to say? And once everybody has that tool, then it always boils down to the artist. Because one person's going to be better than the other.
Gotcha.
Yeah. Okay. Thank you.
Thank you for your question.
Yeah.
Ladies and gentlemen, we have to bring this panel to an end. So just join me in saying thank you to Rags Morales for his time tonight. Thank you. You know what? It was kind of funny.
Yeah.
When I got the call, I was like, you know what? I want to bring this out. I brought my copy of Identity Crisis because it was one of just the best stories of the 90s, and I'm going to start reading it just because I got inspired. If any of you are going to be here tomorrow or Sunday, Mr. Morales has several prints there. He didn't ask me to do this. I'm doing this on my own because I think his art is amazing, and I bought a few prints today. And look at that, Dr. Strange. Yeah. So this is money well spent. Go check him out tomorrow or Sunday. All right? Guys, thank you. Oh, no. Oh, man.